So just to introduce, rather than going around everyone on the call, I'll just introduce you to the panel of experts that we have on our team. Is myself, Chris Kettle, we have Hannes Geisberger, who's a spatial analyst specialist in the Alliance of Biodiversity, Professor David Boshier from the University of Oxford, who is an honorary research fellow with us, Tobias Fremont, who's going to be presenting to you the Diversity for Restoration tool, Gabby Wiedekehrer, who is a research fellow in the Alliance of Biodiversity in SEAT, Marius Ekwe, who is our Africa lead on forest genetic resources, and Arina Janelin, who is our Asia lead. And I think we also have Frank Dumont, who is another colleague, who is going to be participating in the French version of this webinar on next week. So the agenda, we're already behind time because I think we didn't anticipate doing such a long round introduction, but I think it's good to do that with this size of meeting. So I'm going to give a short recap of the past sessions and the background to this session. And then we're going to have a presentation from Tobias on the introduction to diversity for restoration, which is a decision support tool. We'll have a Q&A on that. And then another short presentation about a mobile phone and web-based interface for tracking seed quality and monitoring the Seedit app, which was developed by the Alliance. We've then got 3 interventions pre-recorded from our TRI partners organizations who are going to give presentations. And then the rest of the whole session will be for discussion, and we'll have 3 breakout groups based on those presentations with our panel of experts separated into those breakout groups, which you'll automatically be assigned to in the room meeting Zoom platform for us to discuss some specific questions we'll introduce you later. And then we'll have a short reporting back and aim to finish by 1:30, so that's in 2 hours from now. We'll have a short comfort break if everyone feels the need at about 12:10. Otherwise, I think that's the main agenda for today. Is there any questions at this stage about the agenda? Okay. So I want to quickly do a recap of why we're all here really, and why we've got this component on discussing forest genetic resources for restoration and the importance for resilience of restoration. And I want to keep this very brief. There was an earlier presentation in the first session to really do the what, why, and how of genetic resources and its implications for restoration. But I think it's worth having a short recap of what is genetic diversity, why is this important, and how is this lost, particularly in the context of what we're talking about today, which is seed system and species selection for restoration. We have 2 really important forms of genetic diversity. We have adaptive variation, which probably is not new to all of you, but it's really critically the diversity that enables, for example, in tree species to be able to adapt to environmental change. And this adaptive variation also confers resistance to pest and disease. It's particularly important in the context of climate change because it enables species to adapt to different and climatic conditions as well. And this adaptive variation, which is held within populations, is really the supportive foundation for ecosystem stability as well, in enabling species to adapt to different kinds of environmental conditions and niches. So this is really important as the foundation of any species or population and resilience of any restored ecosystem. We also have deleterious variation, which is often recessive, and which means that this can be increasingly expressed when populations of a species go through inbreeding or reduced diversity, as we'd call heterozygosity. And this is particularly a problem in small populations, which leads to, through fragmentation, for example, that leads to an increase in expression of these deleterious or bad forms of genetic variation, particularly recessive variation. So how is this genetic diversity lost? Well, it's lost through reduction in population size and increase in isolation, and a loss of genetic diversity via a process of random genetic drift, which is much more extreme in very small populations. And populations, when populations themselves are lost, we we lead to the loss of that within species genetic diversity that would be contained within multiple populations. And as populations become fragmented, we also lose genetic diversity through restricted gene flow, whether that be by seed or pollen dispersal in the case of trees, and then consequently an increase in inbreeding and inbreeding depression, which reduces that adaptive variation, as well as increasing the frequency of that recessive deleterious variation. So those are the main principles by which genetic diversity can be lost. And I think it's worth illustrating that in the context of seed collections. If we think about when we're going out and collecting seeds, if we imagine this tree population here, where the colors and dots all represent genetic variation within a single species of tree, if we imagine we collected seeds from all of those trees within that population, we would capture a high degree of genetic variation. If on the other side, we were going to a very degraded small population where we have, as the colors indicate here, a much lower level of genetic variation, collecting seed from those may lead to much lower adaptive variation in the seed collected from that small and isolated and fragmented population. Equally, if we're collecting seeds from these populations, there may be inbreeding by mating between closely related individuals, or self-fertilization, which can lead to inbred seed, so seed that is lower in quality because of that inbreeding. And so those core processes all can lead to compromising the genetic diversity and the vigor and fitness of seed sources for restoration. So why does that really matter from a broader sense, from a restoration point of view? Well, we know very well from scientific research that when you lower genetic diversity, that reduces in productivity. So an increase in adaptive variation and genetic diversity increases productivity of a species population, or for example, fruit production. It increases ecosystem stability and ecosystem service provision. And we know that if you have higher genetic diversity within tree populations, that also supports higher level biodiversity within the other organisms that can be sustained within those populations or that habitat. So that's a very quick recap of why we're actually talking about this today. We're going to move on now to the more meat of this session, which is really the more technical tool presentation of the different mechanisms for actually ensuring genetic diversity is better integrated into restoration. But I thought it was important to give that quick recap. Yes, so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to move on to show the first presentation, which is the presentation of Tobias. Tobias, do you want to quickly introduce yourself before I show the presentation?
Okay, thank you, Chris. So hello, everyone. My name is Tobias Vreemhout. I'm a PhD student at KU Leuven in Belgium, and also at Biodiversity International, at the Alliance now. And I'm doing PhD research in Peru and Ecuador on different aspects related to supporting decisions in restoration. That's it. I will present to you the Diversity for Restoration Decision Support Tool, or D4R in short, which is a decision support.
Could everyone hear that okay? Was the sound okay?
Tool for guiding species and seed selection to restore tropical forest landscapes. My name is Tobias Vreemhout, and this tool has been developed under the supervision of Evert Thomas of the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. First, a short introduction. At the start of the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, it's clear that ecosystem restoration is becoming a global priority. Now, ecosystem restoration is difficult and expensive, so these restoration efforts should be well planned. Methods to prioritize areas for restoration exist already, In the tropics, probably the most used method is the ROAM method of IUCN and the World Resources Institute, which results in a map of restoration priorities like you can see here on the right. Now, once we know where we want to restore, and if we decide to plant trees to do so, the question is how to choose the right species and seeds. This is not an easy question, especially in the tropics, where local species diversity is usually high. And on top of that, there are many things to consider. Firstly, you need to choose species that are adapted to the local environmental conditions, preferably not only the present conditions, but also the future conditions anticipated under climate change. Next, the species you choose also have to match the restoration objectives. The D4R tool considers restoration in the broadest sense, and objectives therefore include many different things, going from erosion control to timber production to conservation of threatened species and so on. Next, these species should also be able to resist the local stress conditions, for example, steep slopes or flooding, grazing, and so on. And finally, the last question is then where to collect the seeds to ensure that they are adapted to the present and future conditions. Now, the problem is that restoration practitioners often do not have access to all the necessary info to make these decisions. So as a result, often a small number of well-known species is used, which do not necessarily match the site conditions and the restoration objectives. And concerning seed origin, this is even often not considered at all. And this is then where the D4R tool comes in, which aims at supporting this decision making by providing an answer to these 4 questions. A first version of the tool was developed in the dry forests of Colombia as a case study. Then what I've been doing is applying it and further improving it for the dry forests of Peru and Ecuador, and also outscaling it to Burkina Faso. How does the tool work? First, the user of the tool has to indicate a couple of things, being the location of the planting site, the prevailing local stress conditions, the priority restoration objectives, and also the climate change scenario to take into account. In turn, the tool will then recommend a combination of species to plant, where to get the seeds, and how to propagate the species. Then I will now also shortly explain what's behind the tool, using these same 4 questions I gave you before. For the first question, we used habitat suitability models. So these models, they predict the potential distribution of species using species occurrence records and spatial data on environmental conditions. We also projected these models to future climate conditions using 5 global climate models, 3 emission scenarios, and 2 time horizons. Then for the next 2 questions, we answered those using functional traits and local knowledge. For the local knowledge part, we did interviews with local experts and households from 8 rural communities, with experts also being from these local communities, and so allowed us firstly to identify the species that are most useful for these local communities, the main results of which you can see on this graph. And we also asked these same local experts from these local communities what are the species that are, according to them, the most threatened, the main results of which you can see here on the left, and also which species are most resistant to different stress factors, the main result of which you can see here on the right. We then combined all this information from local knowledge with a lot of secondary data on species functional traits, and we combined all of this into a trait-based scoring approach to estimate the suitability of the 3 species for all the stress conditions and restoration objectives included in the tool. So for example, for the restoration objective silvopastoral systems, here you can see the traits that we have considered. And as you can also see here, we gave different traits a different weight. For example, in this case, the most important trait was the simple fact if a species provides fodder and forage or not. And then we gave each trait level a specific suitability score. So in this case, it's of course, if a species provides fodder and forage, it gets a high score. If it doesn't, it gets a low score. And then to obtain the overall score for this objective and for the other objectives too, it's simply the weighted average that's calculated using these weights I mentioned before. Now one question remains, which is where to collect the seeds. For this purpose, the tool uses seed zones, also called seed transfer zones, which are geographical areas in which seeds may be moved around without risk or without too much risk of maladaptation or disruption of population genetic patterns. However, with ongoing climate change, it's more and more questioned if using local seeds is always the best strategy, as these may not always be adapted to the future climate conditions. The solution we propose with the tool are some kind of climate-smart seed zones, which we construct by first clustering a number of climate and soil variables under present conditions, and then assigning the anticipated future conditions to the closest cluster. On this slide you can see such seed zones for Burkina Faso under present and future climate. And on this slide you can see an illustration of how the seed zones work. So the idea of the tool is always to collect 50% of the seeds in the present seed zone and 50% of the seeds in the future seed zones, which is illustrated here for two different cases, two hypothetical cases in which case there are two different climate models. But in the tool it's 5 different climate models. So in the first case, you can see that only one of the 2 climate models predicts a change in seed zone, which therefore results in only 25% of the seeds being collected in this yellow zone. And in the second case, both climate models predict a change in the seed zone, but also here you can see that it's 50% of the seeds that are recommended to be collected in these both of these future seed zones. The interface of the tool looks like this. I don't have time to go through it now, but I invite you to take a look at this webpage. Then the output of the tool looks something like this. So recognizing that there is not one silver bullet solution, the tool will recommend 3 sets of combinations of species, with the first combination striking a balance between species suitability and also functional trait diversity, while the second option gives more weight to the trait diversity, and the third option gives more weight to the species suitability. On top of that, the tool also provides info on how to propagate species and also provides some basic monitoring recommendations depending on the restoration objectives chosen by the user. Looking at the future, the tool is outscalable to other ecosystems or countries, though it's quite data intensive, as you have seen. And currently we are outscaling the tool to Cameroon, Ethiopia, and northern Thailand. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thanks, Tobias. So we have time now for a few questions for Tobias on the presentation or related topics. So open to everyone. So you can either put your hand up or you can raise your hand using the chat function for specific questions. Yes, Fandy.
I think I can be heard.
Yep, we can hear you. Yep.
Oh, thank you for your wonderful presentation, the second presentation. I would like to know a bit about this species that you mentioned, especially this species called Mutingia carabura. In Tanzania, it's now like flourishing, and it looks like it has all features as an invasive species. So I'm just skeptical on putting it maybe in your study as one of the recommended species for seed collection. Another question, you said about this collection scenario of which you are expecting or you recommend to collect like 50% of the seed, but based on the genetic conservation perspective, the recommendation is always like 25%. So can you maybe explain a bit about this recommendation of 50%? Maybe if I misunderstood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Van Dey, for your questions. So I'll start with the first one. Well, to be clear, so the tool is now working for the dry first in Colombia, in Peru, and Burkina Faso. But in each geography that the tool works, it uses a different set of species to start with. And Muntingia calabura, the one you mentioned, it's native to the dry forest of Peru and Ecuador. And it's not invasive here. So, well, in Peru, it's not invasive. In fact, the dry forests of Peru are so dry that Muntingia can only grow close to rivers or where it's a bit wetter. But yeah, I heard about it that in some countries it's invasive, and if it's really invasive in a problematic way, then we wouldn't put such a species in the species set to start with. For example, we've also been doing it in Burkina Faso, and there were indeed some, for example, some eucalyptus species which had some also some negative impact on water tables and some other invasive species. So in that case, we don't put them in the species set to start with. And then for your second question, so to be clear, so there is nowadays this tendency to not use only local seeds, but also to try to take into account climate change when sourcing the seeds. And so what you can do, and what the tool also recommends, is to go to the seed zone, which is currently, well, to the seed zone that is predicted on the future climate also. So that's the seed zone where the conditions are currently already most similar to those that are predicted. Let's say if in your restoration sites temperatures are going to rise and precipitation is going to fall, then it could be a good idea to already go to such a place where it's warmer now and drier now, and collect a part of the seeds there. And that's what the 50% refers to. So, well, it could be a bit less, a bit more, but basically just to collect half of the seeds in that future seed zone. But I'm not sure to which 25% you were referring. Maybe that's something else, or is it the same? I didn't get that entirely.
Thank you.
More questions? Helena, did you want the question?
I'm seeing a question here in the meantime from Benjamin.
Yeah.
So he asked in the chat, so he says it's very useful to know that the tool also provides opportunity to include propagation guidance. Often this might not be well known at local or national level. where do you get the information for this? Well, yes, that's indeed can be a bottleneck for using more diverse sets of species in restoration initiatives. And also in Peru, we have quite some endemic species, so species that only occur there. And in fact, we still have some species included in the tool for which we don't entirely know very well how to propagate them. But we have tried to compile as much as info first from literature. Especially for more widespread species, you can usually find some books that say how to propagate them. But then for the more endemic species, we've also been trying to interview restoration practitioners or botanists or local people who might know how to propagate these species, even if it's not written anywhere.
Any other questions? Yeah, Van Dijk.
Oh, thank you very much. I would like to know a bit about this CDIT, of which the presentation has been here. As I can hear,
presentation is the next presentation, Van Dijk.
Sorry.
I can do that now if people are ready to move on to the next.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no more questions, yeah, so we have another question for Tobias. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
You.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, it's okay. I don't know if these two are questions or just kind of remarks. One is species screening during the seed collection. This is very, very important because once you deal with the diversity restoration, it means you have to screen your species to be used in restoration. So maybe Tobias can talk a little bit on this, especially species screening. I mean, from the selection of past trees and maybe so that you can see in this species diversity.
Did you get enough to answer that, Tobias?
Yeah, was the question finished or did the connection drop?
I think the connection dropped.
Well, Siva, do you want to add something, or I think we didn't hear the entire question. But well, so your question is about
Yeah, we can, maybe to turn your video off, Siva, because we can't hear you. Yeah. Is there, if there's no other question, I think in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next presentation.
There was another question from Elijah in the chat. Has the tool been applied beyond the project area?
Well, so the first version of the tool, like I said, was in Colombia, in the dry forest of Colombia. So that was the original project area, let's say. And then what I've been doing is applying it to the dry forests of Peru and Ecuador also, Burkina Faso also. And now we're in the process of outscaling it, so to Cameroon, Northern Thailand, Ethiopia, and also something I forgot in the PowerPoint, also to Sabah in Indonesia. So yes, we're really in the process of outscaling the tool. what hasn't been done too much yet is actual implementation of the recommendations of the tool in the field, but the tool doesn't exist for so much time yet in the current form. And now, of course, with the COVID situation, not much people are starting new restoration projects. But yes, that's a bit the situation right now. And I see Benjamin has another question.
Yes, if I may, I'm not talking for Elijah, but maybe I also want to know, because it relates to his question, is the tool being already kind of domesticated by governments into their whole system to use the tool, or is it still based on projects as such?
Well, in Peru, we now have well, the Ministry of Environment of Peru now has a big JEF project in the dry forests in the north, and in that big project, it's really the goal. I mean, so with biodiversity, we're involved in that project, and the goal is really to use that tool as much as possible in this big restoration project that they have. But so not yet, but we're in the process of doing so. Yes. DFS, yes, go ahead.
Anna, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to ask you, in the case of doing the ROM, did you do the ROM for the whole country? Because I just want to, I was just thinking of Tanzania, the way it is big, and you do the ROM process for the whole country. It would be very expensive. Did you do the sampling, or you do the whole country, the ROM activities? Thank you.
Well, ourselves, we haven't been really too much involved in the ROM process in Peru, but how it works in Peru is by department indeed. So Peru is also a big country, and there they're doing the ROM process by department. And I guess you're right that Tanzania is a very big country with lots of environmental and socio-economic and what else variation. So it would be a challenge for sure. But I have to be honest that this is not not what I've been working on so much. So maybe Hannes knows a bit more about the ROM process, because he's working on GIS things also. But yes, on the other hand, of course, if you do it by department like they do it in Peru, then you don't get a consistent priority map in the end, right? Then when you go from one department to the other, then once of a sudden it can go from low priority to high priority. So then you have this that's disadvantage. But yeah, that's what I can say about it.
Okay, I think in the interest of, oh, go on, Hannes, quickly then.
Yeah, no, just very quickly. I mean, definitely the tool is coming in when a priority setting, I would say, is at least to a certain part already done. I mean, we have another tool that we presented about vulnerability mapping, where we identify also, so in a spatially explicit way, to identify those areas that are highly threatened, also where tree species are highly threatened and where there is a big need for restoration. But we are not actively part of these ROAM processes normally. So the tool comes in when there is already some sort of idea where the restoration should take place. And of course, there are like this vulnerability mapping that we do can help there as well. So just a brief thing, but this would be in connection with ROAM, I would say. Don't know, Chris, if you want to add something.
Benjamin wants to add, I think.
Yeah, I'll be short, but with regards to the ROAM question, we will also probably have another webinar to share ROAM experience between the countries of the TRI itself. But the ROAM at national level often is very coarse. It's to give the decision makers guidance on the main restoration section of main restoration options. But of course, when the ROAM is done at local level, or at least the department level, it provides much more depth of really what kind of species you will be able to use according to the agroecological zone. So there's two levels of ROAM that we have to use.
maybe just to add to that, from my understanding, I mean, the ROM at that biophysical level doesn't have the granularity that what we're trying to develop with the diversity for restoration tool, which is really about matching native tree species and their adaptive potential to specific sites. So that's and delivering multiple objectives, so seeing which species will deliver different benefits. And I think that's where that level of resolution is really important in species selection. But I think we should move on, because we're running out of time and we want to have plenty of time for the broader discussion. So I'm just going to give a very quick presentation, which you should be able to see in your screens now, to introduce the CEDIT app, which is really moving away from the sort of species level issues of how to select species, but much more ensuring we have that genetic diversity and quality within seed collection strategies. So this was really motivated behind the reality that often seed collection can be very opportunistic and not necessarily planned when there's an urgency to collect large amounts of seed, and the need to document and verify seed collection. So this was the CEDIT app, which you can access directly as a pilot version from this website. Is an open source mobile and web application that was developed by myself and Dr. James Margrove, pictured here, who was an ecologist and tropical rainforest ecologist, who then went on to become an app developer. And so we've been developing this tool together. And just to give you a rationale behind it, you can imagine there are different types of stakeholders who would want to use a CEDIT app. There is the NGO government level, who really want to make sure that their restoration projects are of high quality and that there are resources allocated as wisely as possible to make sure restoration has success. The second are the local level practitioners who are responsible for restoration, who want a diverse seed source of native tree species, and they want ways, but they might not have ways to verify or document the origins of their planting material, but they may be willing to pay a little bit extra to make sure they have some quality control there. And the third is the seed collector, someone who actually is going out and collecting seed from the wild, who wants to deliver a quality seed source, but maybe has no way to prove that they have done the right job collecting from the right number, for example, of mother trees, and have the right species related to their seed collections. Underlying all of this is the real reality that genetic diversity is all important, and species and genetic diversity are what are going to make resilient restoration. So we developed both a web-based version of the CEDIT app, which basically is a portal for managers at the sort of project level of restoration, or at the national level for seed systems, where you have an online database where you log in and you can create a CEDIT account online. And then within that, you can create collection groups for different communities or different seed collecting groups, and then add in species lists and locations within the platform. So for example, here you can actually have whole Excel spreadsheets of species that are directly uploaded into the web portal. And this would be linked to geographic location, could be linked, for example, to something like the diversity for restoration tool in terms of seed zoning and seed sourcing. And then you can manage the database of all of these seed collection locations and seed collections through this single web-based portal. But perhaps more importantly for us, within the motivation behind this, was to develop this smartphone application, which is the phone version of this application, the CEDIT app, which is basically a downloadable Android or Apple-based application, which enables a seed collector to actually document and verify the seed collections as they're going through the field, and linking those to the web-based portal. So an individual who's doing a seed collection can create a collection database on their phone. They have multiple interfaces here. They can add in species lists. They can add in photographs of the trees they're collecting from. It will give a geolocation of the trees where the seeds are collected from. And you can not only do seeds, but also seedlings if you do a wildling collection, or this can be modified to track seed performance through nurseries as well. And all this is built in within the single seeded application platform, and is operating in 4 languages at the moment, in English, French, Malay, and Spanish. And the idea is that this application could be a very useful tool to verify and support seed collection, to make sure you're collecting seed from the right number of mother trees, to maximize genetic diversity, and to track that through the whole nursery process. For example, here you can select on a species, and then it would be would have linked to it the location of the mother tree, photos of the environment, and all that kind of information. And this can be linked to whole networks using the web-based platform, which would be to integrate the seed collection information to nurseries within different areas. This example here being for a number of nurseries that we imagined could be linked within a seed collection in the region of Sabah, Borneo. Technical information is probably not that interesting here, but the whole platform was used a number of different software platforms, and as I say, it's completely open source and available as a pilot version for anyone who wants to try it. I'm now going to hand over very briefly to Rina Janelin, who's our colleague from Asia, just to very briefly introduce you to another component of this, the tree diversity database. I think, Rina, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Rina.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this tree diversity database is a new interactive platform for conservation and restoration planning that we are currently developing. But the site, or the pilot version of the site is already available online, so you can go and visit the site here. Next one, please. So currently the main function of the site is this interactive map that looks like this. So here you can see as an example, prediction of how climate change would affect the distribution of one of the species in the database. So this is for Alstonia scolaris in Southeast Asia. And next one, please. Okay. So at this interactive map tool, you can currently see distribution trait maps for more than 373 species worldwide, and we are adding more species and more data as we speak. There is also a database available on kind of the top tabs there, species database, that you can search and find out for what species from your country or region we have data for, or what kind of uses you are looking for your area. And there is also a data repository where you can download these data layers so that you can then manipulate or use those with spatial analysis software, for example. Next one, please. Upcoming features for the website include restoration and conservation priority maps, where you can see, for example, what are the highest priority areas, like kind of where most species in the database are threatened or are in need of in situ or ex situ conservation. And we can also add a lot more other types of information, for example, maps that show locations of seed sources that are available in a certain country or for certain species. And over time, we are going to actually integrate the diversity for restoration platform also on the same site. So that would also be available on this same platform. And we are also at the same time extending diversity for restoration for new countries and species. So currently we are working with partners from Thailand and also from Malaysia and a few other countries, I think, as well. Next one, please. So as I mentioned, this site is under development, so we would be very happy to receive any feedback from you. So here is a website where you can contact us, and we'll look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Rina. So you've heard already today about the diversity for restoration tool. We've now introduced you to the Seedit app and also the tree diversity platform, which really is a kind of one-stop shop combination of all of those different components, which ultimately could lead to a very effective support for and ensuring genetic resources are delivered effectively into restoration. I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen there and open very briefly for any questions of clarifications. I don't want to go into deep discussions now because I want to save that for the discussion breakout rooms. But if you've got any questions of clarification now, then we can take those.
Fande has a question, please.
Okay, Fande, yeah, sorry. I can't see him.
Yeah, thank you, Chris and Rina, for very wonderful presentation about this tool, SeedIT. I would like to know a bit more about when we are doing seed collection, we normally have these georeferences. And you have said that the tool can also be used in our mobile phones. But in Africa and most of the rural areas, sometimes the network can be a little bit a challenge. I'm wondering if this tool can work even without a mobile network, especially when we want to maybe put GPS location of the seed sources and the species which we collect.
Yeah. So thanks, Fandy. So the platform works entirely without network coverage and only needs network if you want to upload the data to a database. But it stores all the information on the handset, and it uses the built-in GPS of the handset. So obviously, the quality of the GPS would depend on the handset. But with low-cost smartphones now, the areas we're piloting them, you can get relatively accurate, about 5-meter GPS accuracy with inbuilt GPS to the phone, which doesn't require a network for it to work. So the phone and the application will operate without any network coverage in the field. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think if we've got no other urgent questions now, we should move on to the other presentations, which I think, Katerina, you're going to share with us. We've got 3 presentations from our TRI colleagues, starting with Anna from the Tanzanian Forest Service, and then followed by Pakistan FAO, and then finally from John from I think Kenya. Maybe someone else can correct me if I'm wrong, but we'll go through those, and you have to share the sound, I think.
Cameroon.
Cameroon, thanks, Marius. Yeah, Cameroon.
Hi everyone, my name is Anna Lauo. I work for Tanzania Forest Services Agency. Tanzania Forest Services Agency is a semi-autonomous government executive agency under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Tourism. The agency is mandated to sustainably undertake conservation, development, and utilization of national forest, bee resources, national forests and bee resources so that they contribute to the social, economic, ecological, and cultural needs of present and future generations. Within TFS, or Tanzania Forest Services, we have Directorate of Tree Seed that deal with all matters related to seed quality and quantity, including seed collection, storage, testing, selling, and distributing to other stakeholders. In Tanzania, we have main 2 categories of forests. We have a plantation and natural forests. Each forest category has different characteristics in terms of seed collection, storage, planting, and the locality or ecology where you can find these trees. The selection of tree species is done carefully to avoid negative environmental and social impact in the respective areas. Seed for planting are obtained from plus trees. The restoration activities going on in the country include, we encourage natural regeneration in degraded areas. We do rehabilitation in some places, example in mangrove, though in mangrove, we encourage natural regeneration. We do beating up in plantation, and gap filling in natural forests. We do removal of invasive species in natural areas, especially in nature forest reserves. Also, in central part of Tanzania, where it is a dry land, we retain an area of standing vegetation like grasses, trees, shrubs, or forbs by fencing the area. This process is known as ngitiri, is well known in central Tanzania as ngitiri. We have seed catalog for species selection. We have seed catalog which has all details of tree species to be planted according to specific locality or zone, altitude, temperature and rainfall, etc. in the entire country. We have also leaflets and booklets and a national tree planting program or guideline. The information we document on seed origin and quality include location, nearest vegetation, climatic condition, latitude and longitude, temperatures, number of seed per unit weight, and the nearest lab. And at the seed laboratory, we document viability, germination, and purity. We carry out a purity test. In selecting a specific trait, we select a species according to biodiversity benefits such as water catchment, natural conservation like flora and fauna, mostly indigenous species. These are mostly indigenous species. For nutritional purpose, yes, we do. We select like mangoes, avocado, orange, etc. But also we select species according to economic values. Example, conifers, eucalyptus, and Tectona grandis, bamboo. These are for sale. And also we selected species according to different end use, such as timber, poles, pulp, medicine, wood fuel, etc. And also wood density, we select according to wood density if the end use is meant for wood fuel production. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Anna. So we're going to go to the next presentation now, I think, Katerina.
I'm Dr. Fazul Bari. I am working as a project coordinator for the Jeff Chalgoza project in Pakistan, which is dealing with the reversing deforestation and degradation in high-value Chalgoza ecosystem in Pakistan. My topic for today's discussion is, I work for Food and Agriculture Organization, and my topic for today is current challenges in seed sourcing for the Jeff Chalgoza project in Pakistan. Before that, what is important and what is significance of the quality seed in any restoration program? Let me give you a brief overview of the restoration activity which our project in Pakistan is undertaking. The name of the project is Chalgoza project, which is called Reversing Deforestation and Degradation in High Conservation Value Chalgoza Pine Forest in Pakistan under the TRI program. So basically Chalgoza is a pine tree and which produce nuts, and they are very high quality. So that's why, and people are cutting those trees, so it is important that we focus on restoration of the degradation drivers. The restoration activity which we are currently doing are, number one, restoration of degraded ecosystem through assisted nature regeneration. This is one of the top important activity. We are 3,600 hectare degraded sites have been identified. And instead of bringing planting material from outside and plant, we are just encouraging the local species to come up. So this is one of the important activity. By this, the local species are retained, and it is a natural process. So this is one thing which we are doing. The second thing which we are doing is planting of degraded site with native forest species. We have put around 800 hectares area which are close to the forest, but these are buffer zone and which can take a lot of pressure for grazing, for fuel wood collection and protecting the real Chalhoda forest. So we will be also, for that we are using the native species. We don't want to bring any exotic and nothing, and we just generally go for more broad-leaved species and conifer, but from the area, from the ecosystem. This is number 2. Then we are also giving a native forest and fruit species. This year we will be giving around 2 million seedling to the farmer. Last year we gave about 0.3 million, but this year we will be enhancing it. And all these will be indigenous multi-purpose tree species, so that the genetic resources and the genetic characteristics are maintained. The other thing which we are doing is control of illicit cutting of trees. We also go for biodiversity conservation because these areas are rich of biodiversity. And then we also go for grazing management and soil and water conservation. These are also restoration activity. Then we also establish nursery with the local community, which are mostly of the local, the seed collected from the local species. So these are 4 or 5 major activities. Some are biological, some are combination of biophysical activity, but these are all the restoration activity which we want to do it. What are we are in the species selection? The understanding the characteristic of ecosystem and suitability of tree species. This is very important that we understand what is the ecosystem, what are the other related species, how the species will perform. Then the basic tool we used in the project is to encourage naturalization of native species so that the genetic diversity is maintained. Forest management plan and compartment history files are also being prepared. We are prepared for 1 area and we'll be preparing for the remaining 3 sites next year. And that will trace out the composition of the main species over time period and the ratio maintained by the forest during a longer period. So it will tell us for the last, say, 100 years or 150 years, what was this compartment, what was tree composition, and now what is the tree composition over time, and what is now. So it tells us about the species diversity, it tells about what is happening to the forest. Then we are also using GIS-based monitoring of the crop composition. That is also increasingly we are using. We have to collect earth, which we use this year to have the basic data for the forest land use, land cover changes. Then we have the economic and ecological value of the tree species. When you plant on the community land, we have to also look to the ecological and economic. Some species have high economic value, others are not. And it is also most of the forests are private and community, so we have to also listen and keep a balance between ecological and economics and preference by the local community. Then the resilience and adaptation to climate change is another important thing, that the species which we are selecting are also climate resilient and insect and pest attacks. Then we use those species which are multi-purpose, giving more not only timber or not, but other values as well. And we also incorporate local knowledge about the species, which species will perform well in a particular environment. What detailed information do you document to seed on origin and quality? The forest type and forest stand with GPS coordinates from where the seed was collected. It is very important that we locate the plus trees stand from where these trees were selected. And then we mark out the plus trees. Plus trees are those trees which are good genetic characteristics, straight ball, good branches, clean ball, good production, etc. So we choose those, and not very old, not very young, select those plus trees. The timing of seed collection and storage and viability we also take into account. And the technical staff of the forest department examine the seed and approve for using in nursery or direct sowing. So these are the current tools which we are using, the method, how to ensure the quality native seed with high genetic diversity, which we can continue in our restoration program. The selection of species is mainly done on the following characteristic or traits. First one is ecological consideration. This is the top important one. Next one is economic value. Third one is the biodiversity benefits. Then the nutritional value and the climate resilience as well as resistance to insect and pest attack. Then the carbon value, of course, we have this carbon, this is the climate change project. So we have to also look at how much carbon will be sequestered by these tree species. And then, of course, preference by the local community. This was in short my presentation about our program. So in Jalgoza project, we are trying our best to go for the quality, high genetic variability and genetic quality seed and planting material. But if you go to a bigger program like mega project, like 1 billion tree and 10 billion tree program, this is sometimes becoming difficult because the quantum of work, the huge volume, is very difficult to go for, follow these criteria. Therefore, now we are pushing the forest department to use our criteria even for the bigger program. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. We'll move on to the final intervention from Cameroon.
Okay, thank you very much. The Cameroon Tree Project is titled Supporting Landscape Restoration for Sustainable Use of Local Plant and Tree Species, notably bamboo and other NTFPs for biodiversity conservation, sustainable livelihoods, and emission reduction in Cameroon. It is worth mentioning that the Cameroon Tree Project is being implemented by IUCN and being executed by INBA, which is the International Bamboo and Rattan Organization. The implementation project, the implementation actually started some 11 months back, and we are currently implementing activities in 3 of the 4 project sites, considering the fact that one of the project sites is in a conflict zone, and it makes it difficult for us to access or implement activities there. In terms of implementation for year 1, activities were focused on policy improvement, nursery establishment, arrangement for partnership, acquisition of land for restoration, and capacity building of local stakeholders. In terms of achievement, from what has been done as of now within the first year, we have succeeded to support 2 government ministries, notably the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Forestry, in the elaboration of an approval of 2 policy documents. We have succeeded in putting in place 5 nurseries. We have succeeded in mobilizing 100 hectares, approximately 100 hectares of land, degraded land, that will be restored from by the end of June. We have equally succeeded to engage approximately 150 farmers in the restoration process and the project activities, other project activities. We have equally supported the elaboration and the approval, including the printing. This agroforestry notebook will be used in the registration of the plantations that will be created in order to attest ownership. And we have equally trained 35 farmers and other local stakeholders on bamboo and NCFPA agroforestry techniques. It is worth mentioning that in the next 2 weeks, we have 2 other training that has been planned, each of which will be trained additional 35 participants, and making the total to 75 additional to 70 additional farmers and other stakeholders that will be trained on the bamboo and NTFP agroforestry. In terms of tools that were used in the selection of species which were being planted in the nursery, we didn't use any technological tool, but we used a participatory approach in which we first of all had meetings with the local stakeholders, notably the farmers, and asked them questions on which are the different species which are of great interest to them, and a list of species were retained for each locality, and based on the importance of those species in each of the localities, we retained at least three species, including of NTFPs and 1 species and bamboo, one species of bamboo that will be planted in each of the sites or in each of the landscapes. In terms of documenting the origin of the seeds, what was done is that in every spot where NTFP seeds and bamboo cuttings were being harvested, the mother plant was being identified with the help of the local stakeholders. Once the seed is collected or the cutting is harvested, together with the local stakeholders, especially the farmers, the location of the mother plant is being documented, and where appropriate GPS coordinates taken. On the site of the nurseries, the seedlings or the cuttings were being grouped in function of their origins. In terms of the criteria that were used to select species to be planted, I think I have mentioned a little bit of it above. We based very much on economic and nutritional importance in the locality. Because if we thought it wise that if we promote what could, the planting of 3 species that could be used in the fight against poverty and against hunger, the local population will engage easily in the restoration process, and by so doing, they will be contributing directly or indirectly to biodiversity conservation, carbon mitigation, and based on these criteria, each of different species were selected in each of the landscape. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you for our 3, from John from Cameroon for us, and from Fazlul from Pakistan, and from Anna from Tanzania for those interventions from our different TRI projects. The idea is now that using those as a sort of inspiration, we break out into breakout rooms for discussions on specific topics so related to those questions. So I just want to let me just pull this up. It's coming up. No. Here we go. So for the breakout sessions, we're going to break out into 3 different smaller groups for the discussion. We'll have 30 minutes of discussion within the smaller groups, and we really want to follow on with those discussions from the questions that were really presented by the 3 speakers in the last 3 presentations, and to go and to drill down a bit more deeply into those topics within the smaller groups, and to discuss where we see those challenges. So those questions about the tools that are already available for species selection, but what other information may be available in your country that can help with this, whether data sources and the challenges with improving that decision making. And then what detailed information do you document in seed origin and quality, and what do you think is important? I think it was interesting to hear about the plush tree criteria used in Pakistan. That might be an interesting topic of discussion. And the choices that are made on species selection. So I'm going to paste these questions into the chat, and then we'll go into the breakout groups so that with our facilitators, we can discuss those in more detail. As I say, we'll have half an hour for this. Is there any other questions at this point before we go into the breakout groups? You can raise your hand, you can unmute to make a question. Otherwise, I think we're going to go straight into the breakout rooms, otherwise it's going to run out of time for discussion, and we'll have 30 minutes for discussion. Comfort break as well, I think is a good idea. So let's say we're going to have 5-minute comfort break and then return here at 10 to the hour, and then we'll allocate everyone to their breakout rooms, if everyone's happy with that. So give everyone a 5-minute comfort break. Please come back at 10 to the hour, and then we'll go into the breakout groups for the discussion. Should be back now from the breakout rooms. I hope that was useful. We're going to try and wrap up. I think we've gone quite a long over schedule, so I hope people don't mind staying for just a few more minutes. We'll probably go 5 minutes over our allotted time. Apologies for that, but I think it's really important that we do a bit of a report back wrap up on the different sessions. So maybe we'll start with Marius and Hannes's room. Perhaps you would like to report back from the discussions you had.
Yeah, okay. So in in our group, we have a representative from, we hear from Central African Republic, Kenya, Tanzania, and Lebanon. So I cannot go question by question, we discuss everything all together because of the time also. So in Central African Republic, the 3 projects there for the moment, they are still doing a lot of literature review, also talking to the country, the Ministry of Forests, to really look at what has been done previously, what are the previous experience of the restoration and the result also, and to be able to select the right species. And the species selection, of course, is linked to important for what is important for the local population. So the project site has not really completely chosen yet. And we know they are interested by a lot of species producing food, or even if caterpillar producing 3 species that are very important for people in the region. And we hear the room methodology was applied at the national level, but the kind of data generated is probably not so much useful to plan activity at the local level. In Kenya, we hear from John. Yeah, Kenya has a very good national tree-seed center, really, who is working a lot. And it's also depend on the kind of seed we are dealing with. Seed can be recalcitrant or orthodox or somehow in the middle. So the National Tree Seed Center is basically collecting seeds, storing them, doing germination tests, propagating, and also doing distribution of those species for different purposes. Maybe it's for plantation or conservation, for medicinal plants, so different type of use. And they have a 3-seed book available for the country with seed classified by even for soil type for different regions. And there was a question, to see how those, experience from the National Tree Seed Center, how is it really going to the local level? Are those seeds that they have at the National Tree Center, how are they reaching, the people at the local level? Of course, the Tree Seed Center is doing the distribution of the supply chain, but we didn't have a lot of time to discuss in detail how the Tree Seed Center is really working basically at the local level. In Tanzania, we have additional information from Anna, from she presented previously. And also we know the country is quite a big country with a lot of different climatic zones. And they are doing restoration activity for quite a very, very long time. So they have also a lot of knowledge about different species, they have a trial in the set up in the field to see how different species are really performing in different geography, and those are also guiding the selection of tree seeds of species and also seed sources, and they have a seed catalog. But then Anna talk about some specific issue that they are observing now, you know, with the climate changing. So sometimes maybe the information they have in the seed catalog are maybe no longer really useful now because of the change in the climate that we are seeing. So Hannes we talk a lot about some of the tools we are developing, all of those threat analysis, climate distribution mapping. So I think I see also maybe those are all potential for us also for collaboration, and probably the tool we are talking about, there's a way also to teach to the country or the partner how to use them or also collaborate. And even if in the case of Tanzania with information available about provenance trial, it will even if make, you know, the outcome of those tools very useful. So those are really area for collaboration and how to build capacity at the country level and share information. About Lebanon, also we hear from Chad, and he mentioned to us that a long time ago, so they are doing both, you know, restoration, reforestation, or different both. And like back a few years ago, they were doing more, you know, focusing on monos specific plantation like Pinus pinea, that really because of the price, and that's also what the farmer wants. But then there's a lot of problem with, you know, pests I mean, different insect infestation that are really damaging those pines and decreasing the price. So they are now switching. It's accepted by the community, you know. So they are, he mentioned they are replacing those pinus by carrot. And he mentioned one very specific threat also linked to grazing, which is with all of those, you know, sheep head who are really destroying some of the, which is really a very challenge for experiment they are doing and tree that they are planting in the field and how to deal with that. So they have different policy, like even trying to compensate people, you know, to keep the animal and allow those trees to grow. But once, you know, those periods stop, you know, people will return to the, so the animal will destroy again the plant. So those are some of the issues we discussed about. So again, we see the mention about of threats, and those are the work like Hannes is doing with all of those threats mapping, and the tool we mentioned, the tree diversity, also those kind of threat can also be mapped and used to help also the country to apply those different techniques. So I think I will stop there. So, and I don't know if Hannes or the other, they want to add something.
Great, thanks, Aris. That's a really good summary. I think we'll move on to Rena and David to give their feedback from the other group.
Okay, hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. So we talked mainly about two questions. One was how species are selected for restoration projects, and the other one was about knowledge gaps. So it was acknowledged that economic objectives are often important, especially in areas with high income poverty. And in terms of specific traits, it depends on the objectives of restoration. So for example, for whether it's for timber or fodder, and so on. We discussed a little bit about whether species diversity is a target of its own. And there were comments that it depends what is your take on risk. So are you trying to, well, hedge your bets by adding diversity to reduce exposure to pests and diseases or climate change and so on? And on the other hand, you have production systems where there is a lot less diversity and trying to go then for high productivity. So Benjamin shared examples from Kenya where people are using woodlots of specific species and with very specific seed sources that are selected for these production objectives. But there they might then actually mix in other species, for example, crop species, kind of to bring in income, from short rotation, or also reduce the risk, economic or other risks. Yes, Elijah's comment was that the species diversity is actually quite seldom considered. Often people just focus on looking at is the species suitable for the site, but not really so much on the species diversity. But it would be important to consider actually diversity also for ecosystem services. That's an important component. The other question then that we talked about was what are the key knowledge gaps in each country or in each program in terms of what species and seed sources are used for restoration. So Faisal from Pakistan was explaining that with human population growth, there has been need to consider more and more economic objectives in terms of forestry. And so this has been important in terms of income generation, but then at the same time, it has kind of led into overlooking technical or ecological considerations. So there's been a lot of emphasis on exotic and fast-growing species. But at the same time, the kind of the knowledge about the ecological requirements or ecosystem functions has been eroding. So this is now something that would be important to address. And we had examples from, again, from Benjamin in terms of different types of production systems. So for example, different systems have different types of challenges in terms of seed supply. So if it's about commercial timber production or horticulture, in many African countries, there's actually quite a well-functioning seed supply system for this. So they are using highly highly bred seed or highly selected seed. The issue then is that this might actually not be very well available for farmers. So these seed are held by the companies that have invested in breeding, and they are then using this for their own objectives. National institutions provide some seed, but it's not often the same quality as what is available in the private sector. So projects are then trying to create seed sources and access to this better quality seed for farmers. But the main gap actually relates to native species that are lesser known and that are kind of often have very localized distributions. And these are challenging group because different parts of the country have different species mixes, and the ecological conditions are not very well known, and it's they have to rely a lot on traditional knowledge, for example. So this is a challenging group to kind of tackle in terms of how to improve the seed supply for this. And Elijah pointed out that in his country there are overall a lot of gaps in terms of research and technology on seed and seed sources, and the knowledge overall is not very well accessible. And it would be important also to look into traditional knowledge and how to benefit from that. So government institutions need to work together to make this info available for restoration projects. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rina. That's really rich discussion you've had there, particularly interesting in terms of the challenges there with seed delivery for of different species, local species. Finally, Barbara and Tobias, did you want to report back?
Yes, I'll try to be short as possible. So we have participants from Tanzania, Lebanon, Kenya, and Laos. And first we started with the question about the tools to select species and seed sources. So in general, in all the countries of the participants, there is quite good guidance that exists on how to collect the seeds, about also diversity of the seeds, storage of the seeds, etc. And then also in several of these countries, they're using bioclimatic zones for both selecting species and seeds, or agroecological zones, like they are sometimes called. So these zones, they do exist, but not in all countries they're really used. And also one thing that was common in all of the countries is that climate change is not really taken into account. So the way how these bioclimatic zones are changing due to climate change is not really addressed yet. Then I'll go to the second question that we also discussed a bit about making information more easily available. And there was consensus that that's an important thing to do, because lots of work has been done, but it's often not accessible, as has been said several times already. Well, for example, Elias from Lebanon, he suggested that it would be the Ministry of Agriculture, together with some leading research institutions, that should take the lead in this centralization of information. And then, well, the challenge would be firstly to keep it updated, because that's often a problem with these online platforms, that after the start it's not updated anymore. And another challenge would be to bridge the divide between academics and government in this aspect, because they really need to work together. And then another challenge would be to actually get the practitioners to use these platforms. And then shortly to finish, we also shortly addressed the last question about the knowledge gaps, but only shortly. So Elias from Lebanon, for example, mentioned that in Lebanon they have these bioclimatic zones, but there hasn't been really research about the genetic aspects of the tree species populations to basically back up these zones, and to basically a big lack of research on these genetic aspects, genetic diversity, genetic adaptedness to the climate conditions, etc. And then in Kenya, one knowledge gap that was mentioned was how to use the full potential of non-timber forest products. So they're often prioritizing these species in restoration projects, but then it's not always well. For example, the processing or the marketing of these products is not always on point yet. And that's about it, I think. Great,
that's really helpful to me. So that's really good. And I think the point of raising awareness and people's awareness of the availability of these type of tools, but also the importance of linking that diversity to climate change is really critical points, and the sustainability of such platforms as well in the future, in terms of being able to be implemented and continually used by different stakeholders. I think we've had some really rich discussions there. I think we probably overfilled the front end of this webinar, which meant that we were constrained in our discussion, which was always a little bit frustrating. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there, that we need to perhaps pack a little bit less in, although we really wanted to cover the whole topic, from species selection and how this information can be used in species selection, as well as the tools that are available for making sure genetic diversity is integrated into seed collection. So, and that was part of the reason why we packed it, and it was also really, really important to hear from our 3 TRI countries, their perspectives and the data that's available to them, which I think was really fruitful for the discussion. We've gone over time by 10 minutes already. I'd really just like to collect some thoughts back from you in terms of a couple of polls that will help us in following up with the next stage in these exercises. And so the first question is really to ask if this was helpful in the way the seminar was presented itself, or if you could just feed into whether you agree with it was helpful or not. And then we want to dig a little bit deeper into the type of help you would like in terms of specific tools. So I think we've got not quite everyone responding to that yet. Give a few more minutes on that. We've got 30 seconds. Give 10 more seconds if anyone wants to vote on that. So it was generally quite helpful, but clearly no one thought it wasn't helpful at all, which is always positive to note. Okay, so we'll end that poll and we'll record this information and if you want to launch the second poll, Katerina. Yeah, so we specifically like to know if you would like more practical training on the tools that you've been introduced to today. So the first one is the diversity for restoration tool. There is the potential to dig more deeply into some of these different aspects of what we've been hearing today. And we'd like to know if this would be useful for you. So just if you could answer that, we can explore avenues for developing the training for these tools specifically. How many people have we still got? But not everyone is. Okay. Give that another 10 seconds. And do you want to launch the last poll, Katerina? Okay. So to come to a close, I'd also like, given that you've had some interaction with the diversity for restoration tool, I'm just pasting into the chat now for everybody a link to a survey, which is we're trying to get some information on people's perceptions and experience with the diversity for restoration tool. We're accepting that a lot of you won't have had more than the introduction you've had today, but if you have time, we'd really appreciate you providing a bit of input into that survey. It's available in English, French, and Spanish. So you can go on and fill that survey in your own time after this session. And it's particularly related to how we can expand the accessibility of the diversity for restoration tool. Okay, so I think we'll end that poll as well. So, okay. So I think for me, that's just to end this meeting. I think there's a huge amount of data out there on native tree species, of which I think it was quite well highlighted today that the problem is that a lot of that isn't necessarily easily accessible, or it's not necessarily up to date or relevant in the context of climate change as well. And these are moving goalposts, so there's a real challenge in linking our knowledge to what biodiversity solutions there are out there, and improving our capacity to scale up the delivery of genetic diversity within those to meet restoration objectives. And clearly restoration objectives are diverse and complex depending on the local context. But we really need that genetic diversity and the species diversity to make restoration resilient. And I think the conversation here has been really very rich and will be very fruitful in us moving into the next steps of how we can continue to support TRI countries and the wider community in making better decisions and better capacity in being able to deliver genetic diversity and tree genetic resources to restoration. So if there are any other last final thoughts or questions anyone would like to raise, now is your chance to do so. You can raise your hand or put a question in the box, and we will also endeavour to answer questions via the digital forum after this session as well, so you can use that as an additional platform, the online discussion forum for other questions. And we'll be sharing all of the slides and presentations from this webinar with everyone for continued access. Benjamin, did you want to add anything else?
From my side, I would like to thank everybody, also the Alliance, to provide all this information and knowledge to share with all the TRI countries and beyond. I think we've gained a lot of experience and sharing our information. As this is the last of the webinar series under our TRI agreement, I don't think it's the last of us working together, but I think now it's important to see also at countries, at specific projects, how to maybe implement or support what we learned so far.
Sure. Great. Okay. So yeah, it's just to thank everyone for their participation in this webinar and in the previous ones. I think all of the webinars will be a very useful ongoing resource, and the fact that we've recorded them, and thanks especially to all of the team for their contribution, and to our TRI countries for their excellent presentations as part of the discussion. So thanks everyone, and I hope you have a very good rest of the day and the week.